Hey, so I finally actually built something on a channel called Billt. Now, there's no 3D printing in this one, so if you do want to nope out now, no stress. I'll see you in the next one, which is going to be a complete overhaul of that desk via some 3D printing. So a couple of years ago, I got this old shipping container dropped off into the front yard of my house, and I set out to see just how useful the countless hours of DIY content that I'd watched over here on YouTube would be if I actually put it into practice. Now, the idea was to turn this metal box into a home studio where I could work in peace, well, relative peace, away from the lovely but very distracting daily activities of a toddler. And I pretty much managed to pull it off. Now, this is well before the channel was even a little wrinkle in my brain, but I did film a fair chunk of that process, so if you do want to see a retrospective look at that project from start to finish, hit me up in the comments and I'll make that video. So then what are we doing in this video? Well, it needed a roof. So on a sunny long weekend just gone, I built a roof from scratch with my bare hands. But why does it need a roof? By its very nature, the container is contained and has its own roof. Well, if you're not familiar with the options around purchasing a shipping container, well, let me fill you in. You basically have a 3-tier set of options. First up being a single trip. So single trip containers are in the best condition. They've only made one trip, and you can generally find out what has been shipped on that trip, so you can avoid containers that have, maybe harbored nasty chemicals, but they're going to be more expensive. Then you've got the middle ground, and that's containers that have done a bunch of trips. They're a bit dinged up around the edges, they're still watertight, they're still structurally sound, they're not quite as expensive as a single trip one, but they're still a pretty penny, especially these days. Then you've got the absolute dogs. Banged up, scratched up, probably full of spills and smells. Cheaper, but still a pretty decent drop of cash on something that is beat out of shape. If you're just throwing some tools in it and calling it a day, then maybe, but otherwise I'd avoid. So if you can't tell, I went with the middle option. It's not a single trip, but it is structurally sound and watertight, and more on that later. And for what it's worth, I paid about 3,700 AUD in December of 2023, and that included delivery to the site, a fresh coat of white paint inside, and our choice of ColourBond paint for the exterior. Okay, that's the logistics done. Now, why does it need a roof? Well, as you can see here in this footage, there are some rust spots that have happened over its life, which makes sense given that it's been surrounded by salt water. And when they tidied this up before delivering it to me, you can see that there's a bunch of places that they've filled in with welds. Now, it is watertight, but I'm not sure how much I trust it in the long term. Like, it's watertight now, but in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, I don't know. Now, there's a few complexities and a few options when it comes to roofing a container. The main complexity stems from actually attaching the roof to the container because, for the most part, the metal that makes up the container roof and walls is quite thin. So if I make any holes for fixing anything anywhere in those main sections, well, one, that's a place that water is going to be able to get in, and two, it's not very solid. The strength of a container comes from the box section of steel that makes up the frame, and that's where we can fix the roof to. Now, the other option is, of course, to get some welding happening, which is probably the best option, maybe the best way to go about it. So you could weld some brackets on here that then you could get the wood to kind of mount to. I haven't graduated to welding or metalwork yet, so we'll just let that idea slide for now. So the plans, well, this is initially where I landed. I had this container-sized box here in SketchUp, and I modeled the roof based on some plans I'd seen around the internet. And oddly enough, there's a fair bit of content on YouTube about converting shipping containers, but not a lot about building a skillion roof, or specifically what that's supposed to look like from a, plans perspective. The way I was initially going to approach this was by building a small wall section off the front of the container with a base plate, which is where we'd be attaching to the container. And then we'd have studs and a top plate, and then the rafters would sit atop that. There would be a single base plate on the backside that the rafters would affix to. Then along the sides, there would be this other sort of small wall section that would taper down with the angle that's the same pitch as the rafters. Then on top of all of that, you would have your battens for affixing your roofing material to it. Relatively simple, but a little complex on the sides here where you have those overhangs. You sort of have to build out this other little box section, and not to mention the small complexities with building the sloped walls. I could do it. It's slightly complex though. But then I had a brainwave that I probably should have had well before this brainwave, and that is the fact that my in-laws have a container with a skillion roof on top, and we know the builder. So I should probably just ask him what he did. So I did that. He sent me back a bunch of photos of some in-progress pictures of the container. He didn't have actual plans drawn up, but basically told me how he did it, sent some photos, and I've basically copied that. So I reworked the design in SketchUp to match the builder approved ones, and I'm glad I did because you can see just how much more simple and straightforward it is. But instead of spending our lives staring at computer programs, let's get away from SketchUp, away from the computer, get some sun on our faces, some wind on our back, and let me show you how I put it all together on site. So I started by admiring this large and mildly intimidating pile of timber that I'd ordered and had delivered to my house, and I have done a fair bit of woodworking in the past, and I did also do the interior of this container like I mentioned before, but this is by far the beefiest stock I've worked with, so at this point I was wondering if I'd maybe bitten off a little bit more than I could chew or even carry. Now, there was a mild mix-up in the lengths of timber that were delivered, and ultimately that is on me because they did call me, they said what was happening, and I agreed to it. However, it does mean that we're going to have to change up the design a little bit on the fly. But how about past Tom explains that to you?
One thing that is a little annoying is, see these, which are going to be the rafters. So I originally had in my plans that it was going to be 3.6 meters long because that's the exact length of the laser light. They sent me 6 meters instead of 3.6 meters, but I don't have enough to do all of the original 11 sort of rafter setups that I was going to do. But I realized in my plans I was measuring from like the very edge to the very edge of the container here, but I actually can't do that, which I'll show you in a sec. So I was going from the very, very edge there to the very, very, very edge there. But as you can see, actually let me get up top there because it's gonna be way easier to show you. Right, so as you can see, they're gonna sit here, not here, and I'm measuring from here all the way down to that point at the other end. So what I'm basically gonna do now is cut 2 of the the joists. 2 of the joists, I'll get them mounted up here, and then basically I can take my measurements between the edge of this joist to the edge of that joist, and then sort of find equidistant spacing in between. I think technically it's supposed to be 600 on centers. We'll just see if I can make the 3.6 meters work. I can make 600 on centers work easily if I cut them down to 3 meters, so just cut them in half. I've got enough to do that for sure. And then I don't lose a huge amount on the front and back, but it would then mean cutting all the laser light to fit. So do I want to do that? I don't think so. We'll see how we go.
Then I got up on top of the container to see what I was actually working with, and you can start to see why I need to put a roof over this thing. Not only do we have the signs of what I hope is mostly historical water damage before I got it, but it's also covered in vegetation and possum poo, and none of those things go a long way to keeping this thing watertight for years to come. A quick sweep and a quick tree prune later, and I was ready to start cutting some timber. Alright, back to SketchUp. If you have a look at the plans here, you can see that the base of the whole thing is a series of joists that run widthways across the top of the container. They're the exact width of the container and don't provide any of the overhang. These are what then get secured down into the container via the aforementioned box section, which as you can see in this footage was a little bit much for my measly battery-powered base model Ryobi drill. I know. I don't have any footage of it, but I switched to a corded hammer drill and that thing just absolutely ate it up. But then I did have to worry about tripping over a cable whilst I was working at heights, so. I then used these right angle brackets and a few self-tapping steel screws on the container side and some longer timber screws, which you'll see come into play later, to secure the joists to the container. And as it stands right now, there's a ton of lateral movement, but these things are anchored pretty solidly down into the container. The lateral movement from side to side will be fixed later on. As far as the brackets go, in terms of holding everything down, I'm confident that they're locked in here, mostly because I threw a bunch of my weight into trying to rip them out just to see how strong they were. Didn't budge at all, as well as the location that the container is in. It's quite protected from the wind, and the wind that does get 90% of the time is coming from the rear of the container anyway, and the front is open a little bit anyway. Once all said and done, I think this thing is going to be fine unless there's like a tornado that comes through, and I don't live in a kind of tornado prone area. You can never say never, but I'm confident. I'm sure I'm going to hear more about it in the comments though. Let me know where I've gone wrong. And now that I've proved the concept that I can actually, in fact, attach some timber to the top of this thing, let's build a roof, why don't we? What's that past, Tom? You have a progress update and some more information about how you're going to space out the joists?
Progress update. All right, let's climb a ladder holding a camera. So what I've decided to do here is I've got these first ones in. Just to kind of mark out the spots. I've got the spaces in between, so they'll be for the uprights. Got the other one all the way down there, and I've now measured the distance in between here and here. Instead of doing 600 on centers because of the mistake in the timber that I've got, I'm going to do 700 on centers, so slightly bigger, but I still think fine for this application. And I'm going to do a total of 9. Well, that was really close. I'm going to do a total of 9 sort of rafter joisty things. yeah.
Cool. Got it. Thanks. So we pushed forward, we got all of the joists laid down, and it's around about this time that my help, aka my father-in-law, showed up, which happened to coincide with me discontinuing the on-site narration of the project, well, until a little later on. So we'll just look at footage. With all of the joists laid down and roughly on equal centers, and spoiler alert, that ended up being impossible given the ridges in the container, something that I'd failed to pay attention to until way too far into the project, so we sort of just had to eyeball it and call it good, and you can kind of see in the final product if you're looking, but it's a bloody shipping container roof, so let's just cut ourselves a little slack here. If you step back and look at it later on, you barely notice. So with all the joists laid down and roughly on equal centers, it was time to cut the uprights and start to mount the rafters. Now, I think when I initially looked this up, technically speaking, we need to have a minimum of a 5-degree pitch and a maximum of a 12-degree pitch. I could be wrong there, but I think that's what I read. I'd seen 7 degrees thrown around as a good pitch for a skillion roof, so 7 is what I aimed for. So a quick saw session to get these 6-meter bad boys down to their requisite 3.6 meters, which my father-in-law did, but I didn't film it. So let's pretend that this footage of me cutting this wood here is actually me doing that. All right, the pitch of the roof, how did we work it out? Well, given the rear rafter was going to sit on the container, I dragged one of the rafters up onto the container, rested the back end on the container, got the measure app open on my phone, laid it on the beam, lifted the front end up until it read 7 degrees, and then measured the distance between that and the front of the container. It was 300 mils, I think. At this point, I can't really remember. I didn't film this part, which is kind of annoying considering I'm making a video out of it. So we cut out a 300 mil upright, got that up onto the container, did the same measure app trick, lined up the rafter with the top front corner of the upright, made sure it was reading 7 degrees, and scribed a line that we could then cut, and then that would turn this humble plank into a template for the rest. Then the way that all goes together is on the left-hand side here, you have the joist, which is secured into the container with those right angle brackets. And then on the right-hand side of all of that, you have the upright and the rafter. The upright gets screwed in at the bottom through the right angle bracket, and that kind of ties the joist together. And then at the back side, the rafter sitting on the container edge gets screwed in via the other angle bracket back there, plus a couple more screws between the joist and the rafter back here as well. Can't be too careful. Then the rafter sits up on top of the upright that has been cut on that correct 7-degree angle. The rafter is secured to the upright from the front underside using these big old beefy bugle batten screws, which ties the rafter down into the upright. And just like that, we're back to Tom for an update.
All right, this could be a bit windy, but let me walk you through where we're at. And climb up this ladder with the camera, because that's, smart. We are almost at having a roof. All right, so we have all of the joists, we've got all of the rafters, and then we've got all of the, whatchamacallits, the uprights here. And then we've got these pieces in here to brace everything. So that's bracing for any sort of lateral movement between them. So everything is nice and solid, and also that will be braced as well by the battens that will go, where are we? They'll go across the front, out a little bit, down the side, and 2 of those, and then that's what the laser light screws onto, which is down in the darkness down there. Then I've got these back bits on, so that's just going to block everything in, make sure no possums can get in here, because possums do love to run up and down on this roof, and I don't want them to get in here and die and stink out the place, because that wouldn't be great. And then it doesn't need to be that high on the front, because we'll put a sheet of something, I think maybe masonite on front. And that's what it looks like from down below. It looks like a roof. Looks like I know what I'm doing. Going to be a nice little bit of overhang there, a little bit of weather protection, a little bit of, actually, yeah, it's probably not going to offer that much weather protection, but it'll do something. Let's see what it looks like from back here. All that boarded in now. Oh, that looks good. Excuse the back area here. Needs a little bit of work doing. There we go. So that's all in the back there. A few little gaps, but nothing that a possum can crawl through, so I'm not too worried. So next up, we're cutting these. So I've got to mark all these out, and then there's a bit of a split in that wood. That's fun. Got to cut these straight so that we can put the battens on the front there, and I'm going to do that for 9 of these joists. No, rafters. What am I calling everything?
Yes, on that, we did in fact cut the front and back sections of the rafter to make sure that they were sitting vertical. Honestly, kind of a pain in the ass job that I mostly outsourced to the help. Once that was done, we busted out the nail gun to get the battens on, and we were approaching the finish line here, but also kind of approaching a deadline, so filming definitely took a backseat. But that's okay because all of the hard, complex stuff was done, and the rest is pretty straightforward. Oh, and something else I wish I'd filmed for proof. Before we put these battens on, we measured the roof on both diagonals to check for square, and this bad boy was millimeter perfect, not even kidding. With all of the eyeballing that had to be done and the state of the container at the start of this project, your boy somehow managed a tiny little bit of perfection in there. And it might just be the first time I've ever built something that's fully square, so pop out that champagne. All right, enough celebrating though, let's land this plane. Battens, front, back, and sides. Cut them a little long on the lengthways to provide a little bit of overhang on the sides of the container. And then on the front and back, we had a batten sitting lengthways across the top and front. And I'm not 100% sure that the front one is all that necessarily structurally. However, it does aesthetically add something, so I wanted to do it. And that's the timber done. What a bloody effort. The two of us had to head away from site at that point, and then it was up to me the next day to get the whole thing finished off. Now, the laser light. Some of you might be wondering why I went with that over a proper steel roof material. And there are a couple of reasons initially. Cost per sheet is similar, however the sheets of laser light were available in 3.6 meter lengths, which is what I wanted the roof to measure. The steel roofing I had available to me was maximum of 3 meters, which meant I was going to have to overlap and buy 2 sheets per span. And that's basically the reason why I didn't, because even if they're similar cost per sheet, I was going to have to buy double. But it actually turned out pretty good because I had to end up doing this part by myself, and there was a little bit of wind around. And although this container isn't the highest thing in the world, I was up there without any fall protection. You know, it is what it is, and the steel would have been very dangerous, would have been heavy as well. The laser light, super easy to work with by myself. And you know what? This is pretty straightforward as long as you get the first piece right, which I pretty much did. You know what? When I first stepped back and looked at it, I maybe regretted the translucent laser light, but the more I've sat with it, the more I'm coming to like it. Plus, this whole front section is going to have some board up to cover the area anyway, so you probably won't see a lot of that translucency. I ran out of time to get that part done for the video, but that's future Tom's problem. That's future Tom's problem. But overall, I'm super happy with how this project came together. This is by far the biggest construction project I've ever tackled, and I was a little apprehensive going in. I'd been thinking about this one for months. I'd gone over the plans a number of times. I'd had people who know what they're talking about sort of look at it and go, yeah, I'd do that too, but still I wondered if I could actually translate the knowledge and the energy to do the thing into actually physically doing the thing, and I did. Of course, I did have a little help from the aforementioned father-in-law. Thank you, I'm very grateful. But, you know, this does feel like a decent self-accomplishment. I kind of designed this thing, thought about this thing, ordered all the stuff for this, put it all together, and there's a roof on top of this container that I built. Well, I didn't build the container, but you know what I mean. So what do you think? Now that you've seen me build something, are we keen to see a little bit more building on this channel? I mentioned I filmed the process of converting the container initially, so if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments, and I'll try to find a way to kind of bring that retrospectively to your eyeballs. There's also a few other projects I want to tackle down at that house as well. Next up is going to be a tree house around this bad boy for my little bad boy. And also, since we bought the place, I've only ever seen this big old disused water tank as the perfect place for a sauna. So let's bump the life out of this channel so I can make that happen and bring that to you. Maybe sitting in a sauna, that'd be fun. But fear not, 3D printing has not gone anywhere. In the next vid, I'm reworking my entire desk setup with a bunch of handy little 3D prints that will help me maximize the space. And until then, you are most welcome to check out the completely free Patreon I have, which gives you access to all of these YouTube videos a day early without ads, as well as a bunch of exclusive, not for YouTube, built content that's in the works. Big shout out to Fahim at Double Sketch Studio as well, as being the very first paid supporter of this channel. Go and check out his stuff, I'll link it below. Thanks legends, much love.